as I was saying, the pilot plant is something that the applicant will continue to operate or desires to continue to operate even after full-scale production is established, when that hopefully happens. And because the operation of the pilot plant is dependent upon ongoing authority granted by the Oil and Gas Commission, one of the requests is that you approve a continued operation. The reason I mention it is it's possible that the commission may, after hearing the evidence, wish to table it until the next commission hearing and table the ruling on the royalty until the next commission hearing. In that event, I am going to be asking that the commission authorize the pilot plant to continue to be operated in the interim. Turning to what's really on the meat of the coconut, there are two issues before the commission that were created by the Brine Act when it was passed in 1979. That act provides that if in the future it should be determined that any substance other than bromine may be profitably extracted from brine, the Oil and Gas Commission will be responsible for determining what constitutes fair and equitable compensation, or more accurately, it says that the producer shall account to the owners in the unit on a fair and equitable basis for the brine that is used to produce whatever the substance might be. So two issues the commission has to determine. First, that in this case, lithium may be profitably extracted from brine. We've introduced the definitive feasibility study, which I think answers that question. I will also ask Mr. Robinson at the conclusion of his testimony to formally express an opinion based on the information presently available that in his opinion, lithium may in fact be profitably extracted from brine, and we'll ask the commission to make a finding to that effect. And then the next question becomes determining a fair and equitable basis for compensating brine owners for brine, or we'll probably talk about it as a lithium royalty or a brine royalty. Mr. Robinson or Dr. Robinson will be my only witness. He has a PowerPoint presentation queued up that he is going to go through and make his presentation. And then I may have a couple of follow-up questions, but at this point, I'll turn it over to Dr. Robinson to make his presentation.
Doctor, would you be so kind as to raise your right hand? Do you swear affirm the testimony you're about to give in this hearing is going to be the truth?
It is.
All right. Thank you, sir. Please proceed.
Can you hear me okay? Is that mic on? Yeah, I'll go with that one. Okay, thanks everyone. I'm just going to give a basic rundown, a little bit of sort of lithium 101, just so that we're clear about what we're talking about. Hopefully that won't be anything new to you. Some discussion then about the project that we're looking to build, for which we are seeking the royalty to be agreed for. So this is specifically for our proposed project at LANXESS's South Plant, what we call our Phase 1A project. And then a little bit, we'll get into the royalty that we're proposing and why we believe it to be fair and equitable. Let me know if you can't see anything. I'm happy to take any questions as we go along. Please feel free to jump in. The
slide changing is up here.
It's pretty, yeah. Okay. So we're talking about developing a royalty for lithium. Lithium is a very important element. It is the lightest of all the metals. Its principal increase in the interest in that metal and its usage is for its a vital part of lithium-ion batteries, and then it's a sort of vital component of the 21st century's energy transition story, based around EVs, renewable energy, etc., and the use of lithium-ion batteries. Lithium-ion batteries are crucial to this energy transition and also for many other aspects such as defense. In fact, lithium-ion batteries form a very large part of the modern US defense establishment, going into battle in every occasion. Right now, lithium is formed from two principal ways. The first one, which happens predominantly in South America, in Chile and Argentina, is through the use of brine deposits, where brine is pumped to the surface, is evaporated in evaporation ponds, and sorry, I'm just having some issues with the internet connection. My apologies. Okay, back in business. So yeah, two main ways in which it's formed from a brine in South America, and approximately about a third of the world's lithium is developed from brine deposits in South America, evaporation ponds. Typically, they're making a product called lithium carbonate. Approximately another third comes from hard rock deposits, from classic hard rock mining in typically in Australia. That concentrated mineral deposit is then shipped to China, where it's processed. The other third of global production for lithium comes from a range of locations, a large and increasing amount from China, small amounts from Africa, etc. We are experiencing internet connection problems. You want me to just kind of, because I think this is going to keep on happening. You want me to just keep on running through, or how are we going to?
All have hard copies. My suggestion would be, since the Wi-Fi and the IT.
This, yeah.
They do all have hard copies, but I think IT is trying to come to the rescue, Doctor.
Issue apparently resolved.
Back on the record. Please proceed.
So yeah, sorry, I was just saying, in terms of where lithium is sourced around the globe right now, third in South America, third in Australia from hard rock, third roughly China and a few other countries, Africa being an increasing amount. Currently, the US, very small amount of production domestically, a few thousand tons per year of lithium chemicals are produced. from a facility in Nevada that has been producing since the mid-1960s. That's currently the only domestic production of lithium chemicals in the US. Lithium ion, obviously, batteries forming the heart of EVs. That's been the focus of a lot of interest in the lithium growth story. Lithium forms a principal function in the battery, shuttling energy backwards and forwards during charging and discharging. The modern lithium-ion battery absolutely requires lithium as the key component of that battery. As battery technology evolves over the coming decades, and as we move to other different types of battery chemistries, such as solid-state batteries with higher energy density, higher power density, etc., lithium continues to form fundamental key role in any battery chemistries moving forward. The supply chain for battery materials right now, as I said, China is effectively dominating this story globally, whilst they do not produce the majority of the actual mining happening within China. They do control the vast majority of the supply chain in terms of refining, processing the chemicals, and then making the batteries in China. So this is currently very much a China-centered story for lithium-ion batteries. And in the US, currently, as I said, in this chart just here shows current production in the US, very small, de minimis numbers, approximately 1%. So that's a few thousand tons per year. Current projections for supply required in the US to fuel battery factories, which are planned, either are being constructed right now or are planned to be constructed in the very near future. Domestically, we need to get somewhere over or close to 800,000 tons of lithium chemicals by the end of this decade. So currently, domestically producing a few thousand tons per year of lithium chemicals from one small facility in Nevada. This country needs to get to close to 800,000 tons of production by the end of this decade and into the next decade. So a very, very large increase in domestic production of lithium chemicals is required to be able to fuel this energy transition story and meet it through domestic supply of those key chemicals. Standard Lithium, we've been working in Southern Arkansas since early 2017. We have been testing and de-risking the technologies required to extract lithium out of the Smackover Formation brines. We have come before the commission several times with respect to the demonstration plant, which is housed at Lanxess's South plant. I think some of the commissioners have had the opportunity over the years to visit that facility and take a look around. We have been working principally on technology, finding out, proving the right technology to get the lithium out of the brines. But we have a series of projects in the region, both in Southern Arkansas and in East Texas, where we are looking to deploy that technology that we've been de-risking and proving and build out a series of commercial projects in the Smackover Formation over the next several years. When we think about the resource which is present within the Smackover Formation, it is not the same across the entire footprint of that formation. The formation runs right away from Florida through into central Texas, where we are working, first of all, the Lanxess facility and the subject of this application. We have a very good lithium grade in that brine. So the lithium concentration in that brine underneath the south unit, as will be proposed to be produced in that first commercial plant. The lithium concentration is around just a little over 200 milligrams per liter. That is a good concentration lithium grade and is certainly economically viable, as the definitive feasibility study has shown recently. However, when we move elsewhere throughout the Smackover Formation, the lithium grade does vary. And so as we move westwards into southwest Arkansas, in an area where we're also developing a project, we see that the average lithium concentration in the brine underneath those series of leases is approximately double from what we see underneath the Lanxess South plant or underneath the Lanxess South unit. When we move across the state line into East Texas, we see that the lithium grade increases significantly again. So we move from an economic concentration in the brines underneath the South unit, and as we move westwards into Southwest Arkansas, into East Texas, we do see the lithium concentration in the brine increase. That concentration increase has a very significant impact on the economic viability of projects. So as the lithium concentration increases in the brine, typically the economics of a project improve. It's not a direct linear manner in which they improve, but it is a very strong contributor to the economics of lithium projects. The reason that we are starting off at the Lanxess South plant with our first project is because we're looking to take benefit of the existing infrastructure that's already there, and we'll go into that in a little bit. Of note, the project in Nevada, the Silver Peak project, operated by Albemarle, been in operation since the mid-1960s. That's on federal land. To the best of our knowledge, that has no royalty attributed to production from that project for the last several decades. One of the things that we've been doing in South Arkansas at the Lanxess South plant is testing and refining a concept which is called DLE, or direct lithium extraction. This is different to how brine has been produced historically. And so the Silver Peak project in Nevada is a good example of what has been done historically for lithium production from brine. The way that works is that brine is pumped to the surface into a series of evaporation ponds, either very large pond structures, thousands of acres in size. The water is allowed to evaporate. Chemical reagents are added into the ponds to force contaminants to precipitate out. And at the very end of that process, which may take many months, often over a year, you're left with a lithium chloride solution. So a concentrated lithium solution is still a watery solution that contains much more lithium in it than when you pump the brine out of the ground. You then take that final lithium chloride solution and you convert it into the final chemical that you wish to sell. Typically from brines, it's easier to process to a lithium carbonate product. So that's typically the product which is produced from a brine type deposit. We can't do that in Southern Arkansas because of topography, because of the weather, and also because production from the Smackover Formation needs you to re-inject the spent brine back into the formation to maintain reservoir pressures. So in order to be able to keep production from that formation for decades at a time, you have to put the brine minus the minerals that you're interested in back into that formation to maintain reservoir pressures. Otherwise, you would just lose reservoir pressure. You wouldn't be able to pump the brine out in the first place. So the brine has to go back in minus a few of those key things. And currently, that's what's been happening in Southern Arkansas for decades. So that's actually what they do with bromine. They pump it to the surface, extract the bromine on a continuous basis, and then the tail brine minus bromine goes straight back into the Smackover Formation. And so the first project piggybacks onto that same infrastructure. We take their waste, basically, before it goes back into the ground. And instead of it going straight back in, we extract lithium, we give it back to Lanxess, and then it gets re-injected into the ground. Volumes remain effectively unchanged. Reservoir pressures can be maintained. In order to do that, we had to perfect a new way of extracting lithium from the brine. So instead of taking the brine out, letting it sit for over a year, we have to do it basically instantaneously. So the brine has to come in. We have to be able to extract the lithium from the brine in real time on a continuous basis. And that technique, or that philosophy, if you like, is called DLE, or direct lithium extraction. It's just a way of saying you got to have a chemical process that gets the lithium out in real time from the brine, and ideally leaves everything else in the brine as is. You don't want to take out any of the other materials. So there's a cartoon shown just here. There are many aspects to this process. It is not a simple one-step process. There are many different, we call them unit operations, but bits of chemistry, bits of engineering that have to happen in sequence to allow the lithium to be pumped to the surface, extracted from the brine, and then that product to be then further concentrated, purified, and then finally converted to the final product that you want to make. So complicated process, many steps involved in it. There are many benefits though for this type of application. So we get very high recovery of the lithium, so we make very high utilization of lithium that we pump to the surface because frankly it's very expensive to do so. So we want to recover as much of the lithium out of the brine that we can. In a typical evaporation pond, they probably only get, being generous, 50–55% of the lithium out of the brine. The rest just gets lost back into the subsurface or through other mineral phases. Whereas we seek to recover over 90% of the lithium in the brine, which is pumped to the surface. So we get very high recoveries, which is beneficial. Because it's a continuous chemical process, we get good purity, which is actually very helpful when you want to make a battery chemical material. And it also has a very small footprint. We are talking about a relatively small number of production wells, pipelines, a single processing facility, and then a relatively small number of reinjection wells. We do not have thousands upon thousands of acres of evaporation ponds and infrastructure required. So the footprint required to make this material, required for the 21st century, is relatively small. This is the sustainable solution to the sort of the generally thorny problem that's ahead of us. A little cartoon here just showing some of the key steps. I won't go into it in too much detail, but again, the brine comes to us for the purposes of our first commercial project at the Lanxess South plant. We receive the brine from Lanxess after they've extracted their bromine. So just before they're about to pump it back into the formation again, we take their tail brine, their waste brine. It comes into our facility. We have to do some initial pre-treatment. So there's a lot of chemistry, filtration, management of that brine to make it suitable to be ready for the direct lithium extraction. It then goes into the DLE, the direct lithium step. Think of it as a very efficient brine. It basically the brine comes in to a packed column, which is full of a resin material. That resin material is made to very selectively only pick up lithium coming out of the brine. It ignores effectively the calcium, the sodium, the magnesium, the boron, the potassium, etc., which forms the vast majority of the brine. So this particular resin just loves to grab onto the lithium ions only, takes those out of the brine, leaves everything else there. And so we are left with, we use some fresh water basically to then wash that lithium, which is stuck onto that resin material, and we make a lithium chloride solution out of the back end of that very key lithium extraction step, or the DLE step. So lithium comes in, we take a very small portion of that brine out, we just take the lithium out, everything else in the brine passes through that selective filter material, and then is available then to be pumped back underground again. So the brine minus the lithium goes back for reinjection. We've just selectively captured the lithium from that brine. We then take that and then we do some additional refinement, concentration, so we remove water, and then finally we have to convert that. We add additional chemical reagents to turn that into a product that can be sold. For the purposes of our first project, we're going to make a product called lithium carbonate. That is a very common, typical feedstock used in making modern lithium-ion batteries. Some kind of high-level information. I won't go into the detail here. The demonstration plant has been fundamental to us being able to prove that you can actually extract lithium from the Smackover brines, make a product that people wish to buy, and you can still make money doing it. The demonstration plant has been fundamental into that. Until we had built the demo plant and run it, nobody had done this globally with brines such as the Smackover brines. So we were the first movers in the space. We've spent over $40 million to date building, operating, optimizing, running that demo plant in South Arkansas. So we've spent a large amount of money at risk to date on figuring out the technology, getting it ready, training our operators, basically getting ready to move to the commercial operation of our first commercial facility. To date, the demo plant has processed, and we've run over 15 million gallons of brine through that plant. So several 100,000 barrels of brine. We really turned that on in earnest back in the second quarter of 2020. It's still running today. We're still learning from the operation of that demo plant. It is key to our understanding of how to build and operate commercial scale facilities. Right now, we're employing over 30 people in the local region in and around El Dorado. And based on the work that we've done there, we're ready to move to commercial application of that technology, the same technology that's running there right now, which any of you could go and take a look at tomorrow, assuming we're allowed to run it tomorrow. And you could see how that operates and runs. What we hope to do at the plant over the coming quarters and years is gather additional data. There is still more to learn. Processing real brines in real time is complicated and difficult. We still continue to learn things even as of yesterday, new pieces of information, new data. This is a new and emerging technology, and the more data that we can gather at a scale that can be applied commercially is incredibly important to us. There's a photograph, aerial photograph there of Lanxess's south plant. The demonstration plant is difficult to see on that picture, I apologize, is a sort of a large white tent structure in the back sort of left edge of the facility. This is a great place for us to build our first commercial facility. Currently in the south unit, the blue outline is the south unit. The pale blue sort of block in the northwestern corner is the location of the south plant within the unit. The way that the unit is set up and operating at the moment is that production of brine typically takes place in the southern half of the unit. So there's a series of about 6 wells which produce the brine for the south unit. They're typically in the southern half. The brine is sent to the facility, to the plant. It's processed for bromine right now. It's then sent for reinjection, typically in the northern part of the unit. And that's the way that that is set up. And that is optimized for bromine production, because that layout is obviously the one established by Lanxess. That's how they operate the Lanxess south plant right now. We will be piggybacking into that existing setup. One thing that I do want to make clear is that the south unit can make a lot more lithium than on an annual basis than what is currently proposed in what we call our Phase 1A project. Our Phase 1A project, to keep things simple, to make it more commercially straightforward, we have simply negotiated an agreement with Lanxess where we process the brine that they're already processing. So we're not asking them to increase or change or modify their brine production profile. We're simply saying, keep on doing what you're doing right now for the purposes of bromine production. We will take your brine and we will extract the lithium from that. The south unit, obviously, the distribution of wells for production is predominantly in the south. There is a lot more lithium that could be produced from the south unit, and certainly future expansion is something that we very firmly consider. And so therefore, there could well be additional annual production from the south unit in the future than what is kind of laid out in what we call our Phase 1A project. So our Phase 1A project, we take the brine that's just currently flowing there right now, but there is lots of potential to produce more brine, and therefore the annual production from that facility could increase in the future if commercial situations, et cetera, allowed that to happen. So I just want to kind of make that clear. Why are we doing that there? As I said, it's a great place to build the very first DLE project, certainly in North America, and certainly one of the first ones on the globe, because we're looking to take advantage of the existing infrastructure. So There's already brine supply and disposal network. The well's already in, the pipeline's already in, the plant is already there. There's already power, water, natural gas, obviously highways to the plant. There's already a skilled labor pool. There is rail to the project, and also a very long history of commercial brine production. So we're able to piggyback our first project on the back of all of that existing knowledge, infrastructure, and facilities. Also, the first project is proposed to be inside the fence of Lanxess on land that's owned by Lanxess. So it's on private land, relatively simple planning, zoning ordinances, etc. And the permits that are required to construct and operate that facility are well understood, and the timelines for approving them are, again, very well understood. We published the definitive feasibility study a few months ago, which laid out the key economic fundamentals of that first project. Again, we call it the Phase 1A project. Just again, it's building on the brine that's already flowing at that plant right now. On the assumptions of our engineering consultants, the qualified professionals who prepared this definitive feasibility study for us, over the lifetime of the project, so these projects run for long periods of time. These are not short timescale projects, they run for decades at a time. First phase of production, we estimated at 25 years. And over that 25 years of production, there's an average lithium chemical production of around 5,400 tons of lithium carbonate produced every year from that facility. So on the scale of lithium projects around the globe, this is modest in scale. This is not an enormous project. 5,400 tons per year is very much at the smaller end of the scale of projects being proposed around the planet, but it's a sensible first step, again, just using the brine that's already there and the concentration of lithium that's in the brine. We get to around that 5,400 tons a year. The CapEx required to build that project is on the order of $365 million. Obviously, that is just the processing facility. We don't need any wells or any pipelines. So that is just the processing facility to extract the lithium, purify it, concentrate it, make a final saleable product, in this case, carbonate. As a result, the capital intensity, which is the way that we think about the cost of the project to build, we think of that on a per ton basis. This project is certainly at the more expensive end of the scale because it is smaller in terms of total production. There are certain fixed costs associated with any new build that are reflected in the capital intensity. So certainly the capital intensity is towards the higher end of the spectrum, at around a little over $67,000 per ton. There is a brine fee to be paid, which was not included in the definitive feasibility study. This brine fee is a commercial relationship between Standard Lithium and between Lanxess Corp, which effectively compensates Lanxess for providing us with the brine. So we are asking them to commit to a very long-term supply agreement to supply in order for us to be able to spend $365 million. We need a commitment from them that they are able to supply us the brine for the duration of that facility. And so therefore there is a brine fee that we would be paying to Lanxess, which basically covers that cost of them, provide or compensates them to some extent for them to provide us the brine every single day of the year at volumes which have been agreed for the lifetime of the project. So it's basically, it's a fee for a very long-term feedstock supply agreement, basically. It's being called a brine fee. It is confidential in nature. It has not been publicly disclosed. And it is unlikely that it will be publicly disclosed. It is intended to be a confidential commercial contract between Standard Lithium and Lanxess Corp. That the average OPEX, just below, with around $7,400 per ton of production. does not include the royalty, which we hope to agree on today. It does not include the brine fee to be paid to Lanxess. And then also, importantly, it does not include many of the costs which are associated with financing these sorts of projects. So it does not take into account debt repayment, which will be required as part of a project finance package, and a lot of the ancillary costs that would be attributed to building and financing such a capital-intensive project. There's a timeline here. I won't go into this. Basically, we hope to be breaking ground on this first commercial project in the second half of next year, so relatively soon. We want to have financing complete. We want to be breaking ground in the second half of next year. We are looking to be in commercial production in 2026. This will be the first new lithium project in the US for 6 decades, if we are successful. A little breakdown of the capital cost here. So again, I won't go into too much detail. Happy to get into this some more if needed. The brine comes to us from Lanxess inside the plant. That brine has effectively minimal, de minimis value associated with it. We have to spend the money on the capital expenditure to put that equipment in place for us to then derive value from that brine. And as you can see, the 365 million capex that's estimated to build that project, there are several points along that flow sheet where pieces of equipment and the installation of them are costing many, many tens of millions of dollars, with a total build, again, of around $365 million proposed to put that plant in place. This is a capital-intensive, high-risk investment that requires regulatory certainty as to the economic viability of the projects. There's been a lot of discussion, I think, in the popular press and in the media and in the mining and commodity world with respect to lithium pricing. I think last year, so in 2022, we saw lithium chemicals being sold on the spot market at, frankly, eye-watering prices, the likes of which the industry had never seen ever. And I think everyone thought that boom times were ahead for lithium. Subsequently, over the balance of this year, of 2023, we have seen the price of lithium chemicals come back to earth, to a more sense of reality. And to show you, here's just a chart of lithium pricing since early 2017, so the last 6-7 years or so. And you can see that historically, prior to 2017, lithium chemical pricing was around $10,000 a ton, typically sub $10,000 a ton. As we came through the last part of the last decade, we saw lithium chemical pricing typically run in the high teens, was how that tended to run. Throughout the end of 2021 into 2022, we saw some unusual things happening in the market. We saw a definite supply-demand mismatch. I think we saw sentiment taking a strong role, and therefore we saw lithium chemical pricing reach some very high levels, up into the close to $80,000 a ton for lithium chemicals traded on the Chinese spot market. And then subsequently, we've seen lithium chemical pricing return to, I would say, more realistic levels. In our definitive feasibility study, based on the work of two groups of industry experts, we used a long-term price for forward non-adjusted for lithium chemicals of $30,000 a ton. That was the understood to be a good assumption for the long term, i.e. for several decades, average price for lithium chemicals. That was based on several sort of fundamental pieces of understanding. The simple cost of digging up hard rocks, shipping them to China, converting them to chemicals, tends to have a sort of a price fixing effect on what sort of the base pricing for lithium chemicals. And so that was one of the items that informed that estimate for future pricing of lithium chemicals. Right now, if you were looking to buy lithium carbonate in the Chinese spot market today, you would only need to be paying a little over $18,000 a ton. This will change over time. I think one of the few things that we can say is that this story, lithium chemical pricing in the future, will fluctuate. Supply and demand in the entire ecosystem around the planet will change over the coming years and the coming decades. We have our view on what we think reasonable and realistic prices are. No one's predictions are going to be exactly correct on this point. Track over brine is very salty water, and it's what is actually in that brine. So it is very salty. It's approximately 10 times saltier than seawater. In a barrel of brine, when it's brought to the surface, there is a little over 20 pounds of sodium contained within that barrel. There's about 11 pounds of calcium within that barrel. There's just under 2 pounds of bromine dissolved within that barrel of brine. And there's a little over 1 ounce of lithium contained within that barrel of brine. So lithium is at very low concentrations. This is for the LANXESS South plant. It does vary, as I said earlier on. The lithium concentration does vary throughout the formation, but for the lithium South plant, this is what barrel of brine brought to the surface looks like. It contains a little over 1 ounce of lithium in that barrel of brine. There's certainly been some discussion about how lithium compares to oil. I think in very simple terms, and certainly Dr. Bamberger can give much more better informed commentary on this if required. I'm not an economist, but as we understand it, oil and gas royalty payments are based on the production of effectively an unprocessed product available and pumped at the wellhead. That royalty is not based on final purified products like jet fuel or gasoline or things like that. It's the product at the wellhead. The brine at the wellhead contains a tiny amount of lithium dissolved within that brine, and there is no real intrinsic value for that brine at the wellhead. There is not a fungible commodity at the wellhead. You can't buy and sell that brine at the wellhead right now. So you have to think about the first sort of fungible product, which is right at the very end of a processing and purification flow sheet. So you have to do an enormous amount of work to basically make something which can be sold on the open market. And that involves a lot of capital and operating costs to affect that and make that final saleable product, as well as considerable intellectual property, commercial know-how. And so there is a fundamental difference between how these two things should be thought of. The economics of oil projects and lithium projects look very different. Oil projects are not as capital intensive, and we've used an example from a Permian well. In this example, it could be another one, and we're not oil and gas experts. But typically, and as with publicly declared information, paybacks on oil projects, they're typically in sort of a 6 months to a year type basis. Obviously, that will vary. For the proposed payback period for our LANXESS, the Phase 1A project, it's measured on a number of years. And again, that's because the capital intensity is so high for these projects. And therefore, it takes a long time to pay that capital off. But then also, the other thing to bear in mind is that then these projects run for a very long period of time. So the royalty, which will exist and endures for decades rather than a handful of years. So it's a very different beast in terms of thinking about the duration of payment for the royalty from these projects. And I'll lay out here just some of the key principles as we kind of went into suggesting and proposing our royalty structure. One of the things that we really wanted to achieve was that the royalty that would be paid on lithium produced from the brine would be simple to calculate and that it would be easy to understand for everyone. We wanted to make it transparent with minimal estimates and assumptions. There are many ways in which you can calculate a royalty. And for the most part, as soon as you get into any type of a net back or you're trying to extract some of the costs of production, you've sort of forced into a situation where a lot of confidential commercial information would need to be disclosed. And as a publicly reporting company, we typically do not wish to produce and publicize all of the key cost breakdowns of everything that we do as a producer of a final commodity product. And that is consistent with existing lithium producers who are, again, publicly traded companies. They do not publish any information in their quarterly filings or in any of their publicly available documents relating to project profitability, cost breakdowns of how they produce that material for sale, etc. Whereas we wanted to put in place a royalty which didn't need to get into those fine detailed assumptions. It would be simple to understand, and that the estimate was easy to calculate and could be well understood. We wanted to guarantee the mineral owners a minimum royalty on the product that was sold. We wanted that the mineral owners would benefit when there is a higher lithium carbonate price, so that when we are benefiting from a high lithium sales environment, as I showed you that chart earlier, so like when it's boom times, then the mineral owners would benefit from additional royalty that would flow to them when we see a higher lithium price for what we're selling at the plant gate. And then we also wanted to share, if we produce more lithium, so if we make more tons of product on an annual basis, then the mineral owners would also receive more money. So the more that we sell for the higher price, the mineral owners get a higher royalty. And that was the fundamental basis behind what we proposed. We wanted to ensure that what we're proposing is strong and reasonable compared to comparable royalty structures. And we also, frankly, we need to ensure that the royalty is consistent with an economically viable project for the long term. The royalty has to allow us to finance, construct, and operate the facility, still make money, pay off the debt that's required to finance and build the project, keep our equity partners online, and allow a project to be financed and to be viable. We looked at some other royalty structures to help guide us in this instance. We looked at the lithium royalty payable on federal lands. As I mentioned, that is effectively 0%. So any lithium project constructed and operated on federal land in the US pays 0 royalty. We looked at the lithium royalty scenario in Utah, which is being discussed actively in the legislature at the moment. We looked at the lithium extraction excise tax that has recently been approved in the legislature in California. We looked at similar royalty structures for battery type materials in the US. So we looked at some flake graphite projects in Alabama, some spodumene projects throughout North America. And obviously we took into account the existing royalties which have been established in Arkansas for bromine and for salt. So what we proposed is that the royalty for the LANXESS Phase 1A project only is based on a tiered structure where that royalty rate that the mineral owners see increases as the realized sale price for lithium carbonate that we produce at the plant increases, as well as the amount of lithium that we produce increases as well. So what we proposed is a minimum proposed royalty of $400 per metric ton of lithium carbonate that is produced and sold. And that effectively matches It's not intended to be a direct analog or mirror to the California lithium extraction excise tax, but it is meant to be in the same order of magnitude as what was discussed and legislated in California for the production of lithium chemicals. So a minimum amount of $400 per ton of lithium carbonate produced from the phase 1A project. And that royalty would then increase on a per ton basis as our realized sales price for that lithium carbonate increases. So when we get over $30,000 a ton, that royalty increases to $500 a ton, over $40,000 a ton, $650 a ton, over $50,000 a ton to $800 a ton, and over $60,000 a ton, it would be $950 a ton. We propose that we would do this on a quarterly basis. So we basically look back on the quarter that just happened. We would average our price that we received over that quarter. So if over that quarter we sold X hundred tons and the average price that we had realized over that quarter was $41,000 per ton that we sold it for, then the mineral owners would get $650 per ton as the royalty for that sale. So simple to calculate, very well understood, requires no additional input of data other than very simple sales at the gate, average price sales at the gate for the previous quarter. The comparison to the California excise tax, again, we're not trying to say that we're proposing the same thing as the California excise tax. California excise tax was developed for a slightly different purpose. It was basically to compensate the state for when production took place on state lands. But it was a process that went through legislation, it went through a lot of hearings, it went through commentary from all interested parties, both the potential producers, as well as other mineral owners in the area. Obviously, the state was a big part in that. And they came up with and negotiated and agreed a structure which basically said for the first 20,000 tons produced in the state, there would be a tax rate of $400 per ton. Over 20,000 tons, but under 30,000 tons, there would be a tax rate of $600. Over 30,000 tons, $800. So it's a different structure, okay? The California one was intended to incent, if you like, early production, and then once cumulative production got to a certain level, then a tax rate would kick in for the state of California. We're not intending to mirror this particular taxation regime. We're simply trying to say this forms a good baseline for understanding what an agreeable amount is on a per ton basis for lithium chemical production in currently in the US. This is the only example available in North America and the US right now whereby any sort of royalty or payment for the production of lithium chemicals has been developed. So there is nothing else within the US that we can point to whereby some negotiated, publicly agreed payment for the production of lithium chemicals has been put in place. Key thing in the California case is that the mineral owners do not benefit from higher lithium prices as we are proposing. So we are proposing something different. We're just trying to sort of frame the order of magnitude as being similar to what has been agreed in California. There are some examples provided here, and under many or very many of the scenarios, what we're proposing that will be paid to the mineral owners at the Lanxess South and the Lanxess South unit is comparable to or better than what would be paid from the California excise example. And again, as we talked about, we tried to use the existing bromine royalty as a guide to help. We tried to use the existing royalty structure in Arkansas, again, to help guide our thinking. Right now, the current bromine royalty in the state is set at around $67 an acre. The South unit encompasses about 38,000 acres. That is what is contained within that existing Lanxess South brine unit. When you calculate that per ton basis, we end up with a per acre basis that would be paid from the sale of lithium chemicals that would be either equal to or substantially better than the existing bromine royalty that is paid to mineral owners in that South unit. And remember, that's for a chemical which is present at a concentration at least 10x less than the bromine. So despite the lithium being present in that brine at least a 10 times lower concentration than the bromine, the mineral owners would still be receiving a royalty which is comparable to or better than what they receive for the bromine royalty. Again, there's another little example here, just kind of running through how our proposed royalty structure works on a percentage basis relative to the bromine royalty, which is in existence. And again, it is comparable to or better than that which is proposed, which is present within the existing bromine royalty on a percentage basis. We looked at some other structures around the US for things like flake graphite, the spodumene, which is a hard rock type lithium asset. These materials take benefit of the fact from that there is a product in the middle of that, from the very raw product to the final sales product. There is a material in the middle of there which is sold. So they take benefit of the fact that there's an intermediate product that can be traded, bought and sold. And so when you look at the royalties that are paid on those are typically on those intermediate products rather than the final sales product. Whereas we have to sell and make the final sales product. That's the only thing that can be bought and sold on the market. When we look at the royalties which are attributed to these based on a final process material, they're a much lower royalty for flake graphite, for spodumene in the US than we are proposing for lithium chemicals from the South unit. So we're paying a much stronger royalty in the South unit than is proposed for similar materials elsewhere in the US. So again, just to conclude, we've put forward a royalty structure to be paid on a per ton of production basis. We want it to be fair and equitable to the mineral estate owners. We think it is simple to calculate, easy to understand. It's very transparent with very few estimates, assumptions, other numbers that need to be incorporated, etc. It's a very straightforward thing to understand. We guarantee the mineral owners a minimum royalty on any product sold. The mineral owners benefit when lithium sales prices are high, they get a higher royalty. Landowners benefit from higher production on an annual basis. So if we make more lithium products from that unit, the mineral owners will get a higher royalty. We think it's a very strong proposed payout relative to other comparable royalty structures. And then importantly, it is set at a level which allows us to potentially, still to be determined, to finance, construct, and operate the proposed project on a viable basis. That's the end of my testimony.
Thank you, Doctor.
Before I pass the witness, I do have one kind of housekeeping question. Dr. Robinson, with the information you now have available, in your opinion, may lithium be profitably extracted from brine produced from the South unit?
Yes, it may.
I'll pass the witness this time.
Mr. Perkins, you are recognized. Could you please identify yourself for the record, please?
Thank you, Judge. Alan Perkins. I have entered an appearance in this matter on behalf of South Arkansas Minerals Association. We presented a written objection. You want me to introduce those things now?
Um,
Just for the record.
yeah, I did not incorporate yours. I assume you were going to move for admission of it, during your presentation.
I'll do that.
All right.
put it up to-
The motion is granted. I've got a letter dated November 27th, 2023 from South Arkansas Minerals Association, the objection to the application of Atlantic Corp and Arkansas Lithium Corp for the establishment of a royalty. Again, for the record, I've got, in addition to this one that has just been admitted, I've got 4 other objections. I've got one for CTC Minerals, dated November 21st, 2023, authored by William Weiss, president of CTC Minerals. I've already admitted Albemarle's objection, authored by Steve Card. I believe I've admitted Warehouse's objection and Mr. Hans Burroughs. I believe those are the written objections we have. Mr. Perkins, would you like to conduct an examination?
I would,
Please.
thank you, Judge.
Please proceed.
Dr. Robinson, you made several points about the project here, the project 1A in the South Plant, in the Lanxess South Unit. And I want to just go back to some of those to make a point. This Arkansas Lithium is not going to drill any wells, right? In the South Unit.
Yeah, as contemplated right now, the project is based on a brine production plan. I think, and this is in the DFS for the first 25 years of production. So we have modeled what the existing well system, which is in place, can produce over 25 years. And I think there are 3 5-year increments also contemplated. So as it stands right now, no additional wells are proposed in that DFS. In the future, additional wells may be added if it's commercially reasonable, logistically feasible, etc. Over the duration of the project, additional wells may be added, absolutely.
But just focusing on the project that the definitive feasibility study was based on and what you presented here today, I think the way you put it is you're going to piggyback onto the Lanxess South Plant operation. Is that right?
Correct.
And so also you made some distinctions between what your project is and oil and gas operations. Let's make some more distinctions. This is not a production process. This is a processing plant, correct?
That's reasonable. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the royalty here is not based on the production of some raw material from the ground. It's based on this processing plant that you're going to place onto the tailpipe of the existing Lanxess plant.
That's the final product is the only time we can get a view of what the value of what's being made is.
Right, right. And so unlike when a company undertakes to drill oil and gas wells, there's no geological risk here. You're ensuring a supply of tail brine from an existing operation that's been in operation for decades, right?
They are basically committing to supply us to operate infrastructure for a very long period of time to guarantee us supply of a feedstock.
And other than the interconnection, the pipelines to interconnect your Arkansas lithium plant with the Lanxess facility and then to return the tail brine, all of the infrastructure to produce the brine is already in place and being operated today by Lanxess, right?
Yes.
All right. So there's no geological risk and no production risk in this kind of facility. It's a processing plant.
Well, sorry, I just clarify. There are assumptions made about what the lithium concentration will be over time. So there is certainly potential resource risk in terms of in 20 years time, let's say, what will be the lithium concentration in the brine that is coming into the plant. So we
But-
still can't control the natural environment.
But you've been studying that for 5 or 6 years, and you feel very confident about that.
We
Is
feel,
that right?
we feel sufficiently confident that we are entering into project finance.
So in your September 6th press release from Standard Lithium, it says the phase 1A project is substantially de-risked as we move rapidly towards commercialization. That's still a true statement?
Yeah.
And at least you wouldn't be moving on to build a processing facility if you didn't believe Lanxess could provide the feedstock, right?
Right.
I want to touch on a couple of your examples. The California excise tax, again, it's a tax, not a royalty. You already said that. Those minerals are owned by the state of California. It's not minerals owned by private individuals. And are you aware that the statute that created that excise tax also provides for that leases for those minerals must include at least a minimum of 2% royalty on top of the excise tax?
I think just to get into this, I think if there are really detailed discussions on the excise tax in California, those are going to be much better directed to witness in terms
Okay.
of.
Well, I just asked if you were aware.
Yeah,
of it.
yeah,
Are you
yeah,
aware of it?
yeah.
And did you bother to try to find any of those leases that exist in California for those minerals to see what the royalty rate might actually be?
As it kind of laid out, we looked for a number that was in the public domain that would be paid for lithium chemical production. And we used that as the basis for the starting block of what we proposed.
You also compared it to the existing bromine royalty. And I want to talk about that for a minute. So that royalty was set decades ago, correct? And that the money that comes from the production of brine initially and the extraction of bromine is what pays for all of the existing infrastructure that you're going to connect your plant to at Lanxess, right?
I'm not sure I understand that.
How does the Lanxess facility that exists there today, what they produce bromine and bromine products, is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
And that all comes from the brine in this instance in the south unit.
Yeah.
And Lanxess is a going concern.
To the best of our knowledge.
So the royalty that's being paid to the mineral owners now accounts for the expenses that Lanxess had to sink into building that facility and operating that facility. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in operations. That's just common sense, right?
I'm not sure I quite follow the point on the royalty there.
You're not intending to try to force the mineral owners to pay a second time for all the existing infrastructure that's there now out of their share of minerals, right?
But our intent through the brine fee with Lanxess is that compensates Lanxess for maintaining the infrastructure and also guaranteeing a long-term supply of brine.
Very good. Now, you talked also about the price of lithium, and we agree that lithium is an international commodity that has a volatile market.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a market which has evolved significantly in the last decade. The contracting of lithium, the sales and purchase of lithium chemicals has changed significantly in the last decade. The role of certain more publicly available pricing reference points has played a larger part than it did historically.
And obviously, as Standard Lithium reviewed the financial feasibility of this project, you relied on experts to help you the best you could try to predict what's going to happen in the future, at least with some comfort. Otherwise, the project wouldn't be feasible unless you had some idea what lithium carbonate was going to be worth sometime in the future. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely.
So on page 147 of the definitive feasibility study, you can turn to it if you'd like. So I'm going to read a little section. It says Global Lithium LLC. That's one of the expert prognosticators about market prices. Estimates that average large contract pricing will remain between $50,000 and $60,000 per U.S. ton, or U.S. dollars per ton. That's TONNE, not TON. Through 2030, based on the assumption that demand will exceed battery quality supply until at least the early 2030s. The price forecast in figure 19-5 shows multiple price scenarios, including an average of the price forecasts of the three major investment banks, the projection of China spot price by Benchmark General Intelligence, with pricing considerations in an oversupply situation, and the price if the high cost facility production was curtailed. Does that sound familiar? And then you go on to say that for purposes of estimating new project future cash flows, Global Lithium LLC recommended a conservative approach using the forecast high end of the cost curve. Although Global Lithium LLC forecasts global pricing well above the gray line in figure 19-5, using a conservative price is recommended in case of unforeseen market circumstances. From 2031 to 2036, Global Lithium recommended using a price of $30,000 US dollars per ton for economic evaluations. And that's what Standard Lithium used, correct?
That was the advice from the external experts.
And you can't, it's not a good idea to take a single snapshot and say, well, today the price is lower, so that estimate's just out the window. This was a view of the long-term prospects for lithium, right? And do you still have faith in what your experts said in the definitive feasibility study?
That is the best advice that we have received to date. I think, Alan, as I said, the lithium industry, how materials are bought and sold, where they are bought and sold, has evolved significantly over the last decade. It will likely evolve and change more over the coming decades. Certainly as domestic production comes online, hopefully, if it's allowed to, in the US, then you may see different pricing mechanisms develop for domestically produced lithium chemicals. We cannot predict that. All that's publicly available at the moment is effectively, and is used a lot in terms of the modern commentary, is what's often referred to as the Chinese spot price. It represents approximately 15%, 15% of the total lithium market, but it's the only one which is publicly visible.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because this would be a domestic supply, obviously. And don't you expect that a domestic supply of lithium would be more desired by U.S. companies than buying their lithium from China?
We would hope so, but we don't know that. There is no mechanism at the moment to quantify that.
That's all I have for this witness.
Tony?
Just a couple of points. Mr. Perkins made the statement that the that the bromine royalty paid for the infrastructure to produce bromine, and that's not correct. The owners of the mineral, the bromine, they don't pay a dime to drill wells or produce bromine, do they? That's all paid by license. And you in turn pay license a brine fee for the privilege of the benefit that license.
It is effectively a feedstock supply agreement, which ensures, because if we are going to finance these very expensive projects, we need certainty. And this is a unique situation. For other projects in Arkansas, it's not the case. But for this particular situation, we need to gain certainty of supply for a very long period of time. And the brine fee to be paid to Lanxess is the payment for that.
And the brine is not effectively, but is the raw material that you use to produce the final product.
Correct.
And the owners of the brine have already received the royalty on bromine for the same brine.
Exactly.
And they're now going to receive, in addition to that, a royalty on lithium
Correct.
without having to spend any money or take any risk.
Exactly that.
That's what it is.
Mr. Perkins.
No.
Commissioners, any questions? And I have been asked to remind you to take that microphone, pull it close to your mouth, and press the green button before you talk. Mr. Phillips.
The plant that you're going to build at the south plant, is it going to be able to handle the total capacity of the volume of the water that plant produces?
It is designed to handle the volume of brine that Lanxess pump right now, plus a little bit more.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in your supply line of the tail brine that you've been doing your testing with, we've heard testimony in previous hearings, it's like a 1-inch line, it's small. You're taking a small sample.
It's a 4-inch line. It's 50 gallons a minute that comes through that line. Yeah.
Which is what percent of the total volume that'll go through there?
It's about a 60 times scale up from what we process right now to the commercial plant.
Is your statement that you're going to be able to handle that much water at velocity? Is it that you're speculating that from scaling up, or have you actually tested it at that velocity and know that you can make it work?
So we know the way that the project will be scaled up is taking what we've got and then adding multiples of those in the commercial plant.
My question is, have you tested it at that volume rate?
We've tested the plant at 50 gallons a minute. The commercial plant will be 3,000 gallons a minute.
How many tons a month of lithium carbonate are you expecting or projecting to produce from the south plant?
So the total initially the concentration is higher. So when we first start the commercial plant, so year one, the grade coming into the plant is at the highest it will be. And then it tails off over time, over the 25 years of production.
So what is it year one?
Year one, I think Jason is the best. Yeah, 5,700 tons per year and change a little bit more per year.
Thank you.
Any other commissioners? Mr. Wolford?
Just two questions. I wanted to go back to dealing with the uniqueness of this project compared to where you perhaps have other projects. To replicate the well infrastructure and so forth that Lanxess has, what would you estimate that would cost in a different setting?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't done that exactly. We have looked at it for some of the other projects that we're developing. These are expensive. These are expensive wells. I think on a per well basis, these are typically on the order of $5 million a well to drill and install. So each well, both, that's for production and then for reinjection, a little bit cheaper. But these are expensive holes in the ground, because they're intended to last for decades, basically. The pipelines are, again, they're specialized. They're a very high grade fiberglass pipeline is required for pumping this brine, so they're expensive to put in place. Typically, and I can't say exactly for this project because we haven't priced it out. When we look at other projects where we do intend to drill the wells with the pipelines in, that, as we call it, the brine field, if you like, accounts for somewhere between a fifth to a quarter of the total capital cost.
So in this case, you would talk about $100 million type of.
It's expensive, yeah.
The your agreement with Lanxess, you say is proprietary.
It's confidential.
Confidential.
Yeah.
And therefore we can't see the costs associated with that. Can you typify them as de minimis compared to all the other costs? Your other operating costs or other capital costs?
Yeah, I mean, they are meaningful. I would not describe them as de minimis. It is a meaningful number which is intended, again, to compensate Lanxess for committing, and is a commitment to supply the feedstock for our plant for a minimum 25 years. So it is intended as compensation for that.
So in this agreement, if Lanxess were to encounter a circumstance where they can no longer commercially extract bromine, they are going to continue to deliver fluid to you.
That's the current basis for the agreement.
Just thinking, we heard some conversation about risk. So you're when we think about risk in this existing field, is loss of well, power outages, things like that, kind of the more common type risks that you think of, rather than you're not going to have drilling costs or drilling risk or those types of things.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
And so price then also becomes a significant risk factor. Did y'all stress your economics as you came into this? Where is your break even?
Well, it's not so much the break-even point. There are still many factors that we have to account for in building the first commercial project. So we are in a process of securing project finance. Project finance is a mix of equity as well as debt. Obviously, we're in a high interest rate world at the moment, and therefore debt is more expensive than it was several years ago. When we think about the project viability, we have to take into account and balance all of those factors. So the final capital cost is also still to be determined. To be clear, we put forward our engineering and our external consultants' best guess in terms of real cost that went into the definitive feasibility study, but it's not still the actual where we signed the check for. So that's still to be finalized. The cost of debt still obviously being finalized. So we've put together a royalty structure which leaves us with, when everything is balanced, there's still a project that works.
Have you input the proposed 12.5% royalty structure, and how does that affect your economics?
That results in a project that does not work.
What are the key metrics in your industry that you look at? We're used to net profit value, payout time, internal rates of return. If you could explain, why you use like an 8% discount factor and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, the one of the highest order things that we have to consider, again, this is for a company like Standard Lithium looking to build what we're going to build. So we have to take some debt against the project. The debt provider pretty much always takes precedence in every financial structure that you have. Their ability to lend you the money completely lies on your ability to pay back the debt plus the interest. So that debt, as they call it, the debt service coverage ratio, that's probably the highest order financial metric that we look at when we are establishing whether something works or not. If you're a company that has a balance sheet and you can finance it yourself, that's a different story. But for us, that's key for us.
The 8% discount factor, what does it represent?
That was just the economist view for the DCF model. An 8% discount was what was used to discount future cash flows. I'm not an economist. That was their choice. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other commissioners? Commissioner,
He asked you, Andy, about the 12.5%, and we didn't hear it. What did you say?
I said that makes the project not viable.
Say that, speak in the microphone, please.
The 12.5% that Commissioner Wolford suggested, which was proposed, that results in a project which will not work. The economics will not work at that royalty rate on the final product. Yeah.
any other commissioners? Commissioner, Chairman?
How many tons a day do you think you will produce?
Roughly 18 tons a day of product. Yeah.
Right. You take the math, well, I took the number off this sheet right here. 5,400 tons, and I divided it by 365, and that comes to 14.79 a day. Well, when you do the math times $30,000, that comes to $162 million a year. Okay, you take your expense of $73.90 per ton and do the multiplying out, and you come with a net number of $122 million a year. Does that sound like a number you've been working with?
That does not take into account the royalty.
Right.
It doesn't take into account the brine fee to be paid to Lanxess, as we mentioned. So that's not included there. It also does not take into account the interest payments that would need to be paid back to the debt provider that would be financing the project.
Right. Now you got right here on this page, you got $7,390 per ton, average operating expense. Does that have Lanxess in that number?
No, so that does not include. It doesn't include the royalty. It does not include Lanxess's brine fee, and again, it doesn't include any of the costs of financing. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Any other commissioners?
Using those numbers, 5,700 tons per year. It is using 5,700 tons per year at picking your price number. Would you assume that you would have a gross sales between $200 and $285 million in that year, and you would pay somewhere between $3 and $4.275 million in royalties? Does that calculate out pretty close?
Well, that's not including any of those additional costs.
Well, the royalty is going to bear the cost.
Yeah, so there's the royalty, the Lanxess brine fee, and then the financing costs would need to be taken out.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Any other questions from the commission? Any follow-up from council based on the line of questions from the commission? Mr. Honey?
No.
Mr. Perkins?
No.
All right. Tony, do you rest?
Concludes our presentation.
Subject to rebuttal,
Correct.
potential rebuttal. Commissioners, you've been going for a little more than an hour and a half. Do you need to take a 5 or 10 minute break before we get into Mr. Perkins' presentation? What's the commission? Just keep going? I don't know how long Mr. Perkins' presentation is gonna take, Commissioners. Mr.
It
Perkins?
won't take that long, but I don't know what I could time it, sorry. Maybe 20, 30 minutes, I'm guessing.
It's up, yeah, I don't wanna break up your presentation in the middle of it. That would be the. Do you think you can finish up in 25 minutes in terms of your presentation or no?
It'd be close, to that.
Again, what's the pleasure of the commission? What would you like to do? Do you want to break right now? Mr. Chairman, what do you want to do? There are a lot of people here and I am confident that, well, first off, I don't think we're going to finish up before lunch. That's number one. So these folks are going to have to fend for themselves. More likely than not out on Maumelle Boulevard to find something to eat. All right, Mr. Perkins, please proceed.
All right, well, first of all, I submitted, as you mentioned earlier, an objection and which had two exhibits. Exhibit 1 was the list of members of the South Arkansas Minerals Association. Exhibit 2 was an expert report by Mr. Eric Krause and his colleague at Applied Economics. I would ask that our objection and the two exhibits be admitted into the record.
They can't hear you.
Okay, how's that?
From my perspective, it sounds just the same as the previous time, Mr. Perkins, but yeah, those microphones are sketchy too. That one's gonna be better.
All right, how's that?
Oh, that's better.
Much better. Okay. Then I'll repeat my request that our objection and the two exhibits be admitted into the record.
I think they've already been admitted,
Okay.
but
I
I
wasn't
will,
real clear on.
yeah,
on-
they are, your motion is granted, your objection and your exhibits are admitted.
All right, then, as you know, I've brought with me Mr. Eric Krause, who's an economics expert. I previously submitted his curriculum vitae, and there's additional information about his background in the report, and informed you that I would be asking you today to recognize him as an expert in the field of economics.
I've read his resume, his background, his education, his experience. He meets the qualifications for an expert. Your motion is granted.
All right, and then I would ask that the witness be sworn.
You would ask what?
That the witness be sworn.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sir, would you be so kind as to raise your right hand? Do you swear from the testimony about to give in this hearing is going to be the truth?
I do.
Thank you, sir. Please proceed, Mr. Perkins.
All right, can you pull up your presentation? As you know, he did submit a report. These are just a few slides that basically are excerpts from the report, so we don't have to read the whole report to you. Let's start out with just a brief introduction. Eric, will you give the commission a very brief synopsis of your advanced degrees and a short summary of your work history, and in particular, your experience in areas related to royalties?
Absolutely. First, apologies. I have been fighting off the flu, so that's the reason for the mask. And so I apologize for that. My name is Eric Krause. I am with Applied Economics Consulting Group in Austin, Texas. Please don't hold it against me, attended the University of Texas at Austin for both undergrad and grad school, went to business school there. I advised Alan we may want to skip that, but I did get a degree in economics in undergraduate school from the University of Texas, as well as my master's in business administration. with a concentration in finance. Years later, I've been with Applied Economics for over 20 years. Applied Economics is a boutique consulting firm based in Austin and Houston. We do a combination of litigation and business consulting. When I say litigation consulting, I mean generally expert work in the area of economics and finance, issues of valuation, issues of damages. I've done a significant amount of oil and gas damages work, both in commercial litigation, as well as a great deal of royalty litigation. Royalties all over the country, from federal royalties offshore, royalty disputes in places like Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Montana, California, Colorado, Wyoming, everywhere that there's crude oil and natural gas royalty disputes, both in the class action context and non-class action context. I've done probably 50 matters dealing with that as a testifying expert. In addition, I've done a significant amount of consulting expertise work for the oil and gas adjacent industries in the areas of processing, midstream, gathering, compression, downstream, financial trading, to valuation of upstream assets like wells, units, things of that nature. We've dealt with the royalty accounting, not just in disputes, but also in a consulting role. We've been engaged to build unit decks for companies like Chevron, Statoil, for units all over the country. I have been involved in disclosure. I've been involved in a number of Arkansas royalty disputes. I was engaged by Southwestern Energy to present opinions with regards to the calculation of cost of service rate making for their gathering pipelines, their midstream pipelines, as well as being involved in some class action disputes over royalty valuation for XTO and BP in Arkansas as well. So I am not just in the oil and gas industry. I have also done a substantial amount of work in the intellectual property industry, valuation of patents, trademarks, and a big part of that is royalties. In most intellectual property disputes, one of the key damages elements is a proposed running royalty rate or a hypothetical royalty rate. So certainly that experience comes to bear as well in reaching my opinions. Primarily, Applied Economics and myself, we do deal with commercial litigation in the areas of economics and finance. And the areas we most focus on are valuation and damages. And so the type of analyses that I've done here are consistent with that type of work.
Thanks, Eric. And so in this case, you were engaged by South Arkansas Minerals to review the proposed royalties from Lanxess and Arkansas Lithium, and then to evaluate the economic information in their definitive feasibility study report and to develop opinions about a fair and equitable royalty. Is that a fair statement?
That's correct.
All right. So after you conducted your analysis, you produced a report. Is that right? Dated, let's see, November 27, 2023, that was attached to our objection in this matter?
That's correct. My colleague, Angela Pasley, who's a CPA, who's also with Applied Economics, she and I developed this report together, and we presented it in November.
And as you sit here today, are you confident that report is true and accurate to the best of your knowledge? Nothing you need to go back and correct or anything of that nature?
Certainly is correct and accurate to the best of my knowledge, and is predicated on the analysis that was performed based on the Standard Lithium definitive feasibility study as submitted.
Okay, so we'll jump right into it then. You've prepared this sort of summary presentation to assist in relating the findings of your report to the commission. We're going to walk through that together. Why don't you begin by giving the commissioners just a summary of the primary opinions that you developed after your review?
Sure. So, based on my review of the definitive feasibility study, as well as the royalty proposal, it's my opinion that, or it's our opinion, Ms. Pasley and my opinion, that the proposed royalty is not reasonably fair and equitable, given the economic upside, the economic value that is projected by Standard Lithium to be derived from this project. We believe there is more economic value to be shared with the mineral owners than what's proposed. We think what's proposed is small, and we think it is not reflective of the value that's being extracted from the owner's land. That said, especially as someone who often works for industry and has worked for these types of companies, I of course take into consideration that these projects have to make economic sense. You can't create burdens that are so high that there's no point to imposing them, because it makes the project not make sense. So that's why we did a study based on the definitive feasibility study to determine what we thought would be more appropriate. What they propose represents a 1.33% royalty at their base case. At their base case of a $30,000 per ton price, their proposal is 1.33% attributable to the royalties. So given the price difference between something like bromine, something like salt, the types of comparators they've used, that seems low. So we did look at the three comparables that they use, and we don't find two of them, we don't find comparable on an economic basis. We think the market for lithium is so different from bromine and salt that you can't really use them as reasonable comparators. The economics and the margins are squeezed so much more by those prices that it doesn't really make a good comparator. And then their California comparison, in our opinion, isn't fulsome. It doesn't represent the full picture of what the actual royalty is. It's just an excise tax. To be clear, they acknowledge that. They say, look, we're just looking for what's in the public domain. We see this excise tax for what's on state lands. We're not saying it's a royalty, but when you look into it, you can see it's both an excise tax and a minimum royalty of 2%. And we believe there's evidence that those actual royalties are much higher than 2%. So I've done a comparison. This slide just shows their proposal and the three comparators that were in their letter that they utilized, or that they submitted, I should say. And the first one was the California royalty, and how the applicants presented is it's an excise tax that is 400, that basically converts to $400 per ton. When you look into it, there's more to the story than that. First of all, that $400 increases as time goes by, not just as they hit production thresholds, but also there's a CPI escalator built into that. Second is, as I said, the royalty to be not less than 2%. So when you take those factors into account, I created this table that shows for years 0 through 5, at any price, the minimum excise tax would be $400, but at year 6 plus, the excise tax would be $800. When you layer on a minimum of 2% of royalty, that burden then obviously becomes much greater. In comparison to the applicant's proposed royalty for Arkansas, which has the graduated amounts based on price, you'll see that the combined price, or combined burden of $800 up to $1,800 for years 0 through 5, and $1,200 up to $2,200 for years 6+. Those are substantially greater burdens than the proposal that Standard Lithium and Laxness have made. On the bromine, this requires some conversion. You have to take into account because it's on a per acre basis. You have to look at it on a dollars per year per net mineral acre equivalent, and it's going to vary based on the lithium sales price and production volume. But if we look at the prices on a actual average annual production of whether you do it on 5,730 tons that they put in their feasibility study, or if you take their model and actually calculate what their anticipated average production of 5,189 tons are, at $30,000, even that, the conversion is less than the amount of bromine, the burden of royalty on bromine. It would come to $60.21 on the 5,730, or $54.34 on the 5,189. So their proposal at the $30,000 base case level is actually less than the bromine royalty. That's despite the fact that bromine is worth substantially less than the lithium. And this is, again, on the salt issue and the bromine issue, I keep coming back to this, but it's important. Lithium at $30,000 is worth almost 10 times as much as the bromine. I understand that it's already been processed and it's the bromine, we're piggybacking off of it and they're additive. But you are in fact extracting a substantially greater value out of it by doing this. It's not a reasonable comparator, in my opinion. And so I don't think that it provides a very good basis. And even if you do use it as a basis, their proposal comes up short of the bromine price once you make those conversions. Finally, on salts, the 1.55% that was approved quite some time ago. At the time, those salt prices per ton were in the tens, if not low hundreds of dollars, as opposed to the $30,000 price we're talking about here for lithium. So I don't think it makes for a very good comparator. As similar to that was presented earlier as part of the Standard Lithium presentation, depending on where you are in each tranche of the pricing tiers, the actual effective royalty rate that would be realized by their proposal would be between 1.33% and 1.67%, depending on if you were at the high end or low end of any particular pricing tranche. Meaning if you're at $30,001 and you're getting a higher royalty rate, you're still getting the same thing you would be getting at $39,999. So if your royalty is the same in that $10,000 spread, you're only getting 1.33% at the high end, whereas you're getting 1.67% at the low end. Hopefully that makes sense. Regardless, just like as I was saying, salt to even today, the sodium chloride, calcium chloride, magnesium hydroxide, the types of products that were being discussed in 2007 when this was determined, those were prices that were in tens of dollars and low hundreds of dollars. Today, they range anywhere from $200 to $1,700 a ton. That's fractional compared to the value of lithium. And so given that significant difference in economic value that's being extracted, and given the greater upside that exists for Standard Lithium and Laxness to realize as a result of this, coming back to fair and equitable, there may be more to share with the mineral owners whose lands are being utilized to generate this. So ultimately, in terms of those comparisons, the conclusions we reached were that they aren't good comparisons when you're talking about salts and bromine. And when you're looking at the California case, you need to look at it more fulsomely. The excise tax is not a reasonable benchmark to base a royalty on, and our private royalty owner agreement on in Arkansas. Even if you utilize these benchmarks, the proposal made by Standard Lithium and Laxness still comes up short in a lot of cases, depending on the pricing assumption that's utilized. Ultimately, I don't think it's been justified using these comparators, that their proposal is fair and reasonable.
So then you conducted your own analysis in a different way. And so I'll tell the commission why you took a different approach and where you got the information, the financial information that you used to develop your opinion.
Sure. So everything that's been discussed so far is in the context of evaluating what's being proposed to pay the royalty owners. What I wanted to do is look at it and contextualize it as fair and equitable for both parties. I wanted to understand, what is each party gaining from this project? And the best source for that is the definitive feasibility study. I do not put myself out there as a lithium extraction construction cost expert. I certainly don't put myself out there as an expert in the very advanced chemical engineering that has to be done with this. So I am relying on the definitive feasibility study that was performed by Standard Lithium to come up with an assessment of what do the economics of this project actually look like if it proceeds on this 20-year basis. I want to understand how much does Standard Lithium and Laxness stand to gain, and how much do the royalty owners stand to gain. So they helpfully perform a economics pro forma study themselves, a projection of 20 years to say, how would we evaluate and value this? This is a typical income approach valuation performed by the company. If the pro forma financials showed a large negative return, then that tells them, you know what, this project doesn't make sense, and it'd probably be really dumb to spend $350 million to lose money over the long term. Of course, they are based on assumptions, as are all pro forma discounted cash flow valuations. But this is a bit of a unique situation. This situation, a lot of companies don't have the benefit of having 5 years of piloting this and seeing what the success is. As their release said, they've been de-risking this. In valuation, one of the most important elements, the most important variables in valuation is risk. Discount rates have to be really high, or you have to adjust reserves for, say, an oil and gas piloting program. The geological risk, the production risk. This is a built-in stream that all of the backbone has already been built. This is just a module built off that backbone. And the technical risk has been being addressed over the last 5 years in all the testing. That risk assessment can be taken into account in this financial analysis. And I think it has been. And to their credit, I think they've done a good job of assessing that risk and applying it properly in their DCF modeling. That is a big benefit. There is more value and less risk going forward to them as a result of all of this testing and piloting that's been going on for the last 5 years. Based on that, their DCF, I took their same assumptions, what was presented there, and I took into account the capital costs, all the operating expenses. I also accepted, of course, their production projections. I'm not in a position to challenge those. I will note that in their earlier feasibility studies that they had presented drafts and earlier versions of, they had significantly more production. 6 times as much production anticipated. In the 2023 submission, that production goes from 30,000 roughly tons per year down to 5,000. I'm not in a position to challenge that. I'm presuming that that's based on the testing and everything that they've learned and the concentrations over the years. But I just note that that's the type of assumption that I simply have to accept, and I'm not in a position to challenge. The other assumption I've accepted as well as made my own sensitivities to is the price. As we heard earlier, the pricing for lithium, it is a global commodity. It is a very volatile marketplace, and it can change. I don't think demand is going away, and their own presentation demonstrated a significant growth in demand globally and domestically for lithium. And so that, as that continues to grow, there's good reason to think that even as new potential supply sources come online, that the pricing is never gonna the bottom's never gonna drop out and make all the economics on this not make sense. I think the $30,000 is a good conservative base case. I think there's a strong basis to believe that it could be much higher than that over the next 20 years. So what I have done is perform a calculation of what the impact of various royalty proposals would be to their economics. So their economics ultimately came to an after-tax net present value for the project of $537 million on the basis of a capital expenditure of just over $360 million. And obviously all the operating expenses that we've discussed as well. It comes to a after-tax rate of return for the project of 23.72%. That is a very good rate of return. That is very profitable. I have a lot of experience in valuation for oil and gas companies in particular. And while I do agree there is a sharp divide between this particular project and a traditional oil and gas project, in some ways a lot less risky, as we've talked about, but in some ways it's more experimental, and we have a little less confidence in exactly where the price will be tomorrow or a year from now. But in my experience, the hurdle rates that exist for oil and gas companies, both in E&P as well as midstream, for them to invest this type of money, they would expect to meet a hurdle rate of 10 to 15% returns. A 23% return or 24 rounded is very attractive. It would be something that they would very strongly consider. I've provided some return on equity. To be clear, return on equity and internal rate of return are not exactly the same. There is some similarity depending on how a project is funded, but just to give everybody a sense, in metals and mining, the average return on equity over the last 15 to 20 years has been about 11.48%. And in the oil and gas industry, which does have a great deal of volatility depending on prices, as I'm sure you are all aware, is closer to 4.31%. So this is just providing some context for that 23.72%. So what I've done is provided a sensitivity table. The table that is coming up. There it is. All I've done here is say, using their model, what happens to the rates of return, what happens to the NPV, what happens to their cash flows if I impose a royalty. Their pro forma analysis that they presented had no royalty in it. We also have now heard that it didn't have the brine supply cost in it as well. I don't have a basis to make that projection. They are claiming confidentiality, and I understand that, but I don't know what it would be. The question of whether it was de minimis or not is a very good one for my purposes, but obviously with no input on what that actually is, I can't work that into this table. So I do acknowledge that that cost is not in the definitive feasibility study modeling, but I'm simply relying on their information that they utilize. Also, to the point of financing costs, they have emphasized that heavily, and I think there's a reason for that, and that's because it wasn't present in the definitive feasibility study. Anytime you're talking about funding a $360 million project, how you fund that is extremely critical to the valuation. If it's financed with debt versus financed with equity, it's going to have an impact. Now, those impacts can be complicated. For example, the after-tax impact to the NPV and IRR may not be very significant if it's debt financed, because there are significant tax advantages to financing with debt. However, if there are financing costs that are going to be incurred, it's unclear what percentage of it would be. I did note in the definitive feasibility study that there was an MOU that Laxness would provide equity for a significant portion of the cost, over 30%. So without the details of that information, which I would have expected to be in the feasibility study, but it wasn't, without those details, it's difficult for me to model those things. So to be clear, all of these sensitivity tables rely exclusively on the pro forma analysis that they provided as part of their definitive feasibility study that they publicly disclose. When I impose a royalty burden that they propose, as well as the sliding scale of percentages, what you have here are the impacts, the economic outcomes for the project in assuming each of those burdens. So the top line in this table, the red line, this is the impact of the Laxness and Standard Lithium proposal. What it would have the impact of doing is reducing the post-tax NPV to merely $537 million. So not much of an impact to their overall return in their base case of $30,000 for 20 years at the production that they assume. That is not much of a reduction off a no royalty scenario. The next line instead imposes a 2.5% royalty. Instead of making it a static amount at $400 per ton or $600 per ton, depending on the price, you can just scale it based on the actual price, and you get more actual upside within those tranches. Instead of being paid $400, the exact same amount, for a price that's $10,000 more or $10,000 less at a percentage, if it's $35,000, the royalty owner gets the upside just as much as as Standard Lithium gets the upside. That's the benefit of just using the percentage. The percentages also meet all of those bullet point standards that Standard Lithium stated they cared about: transparency, a minimum royalty, the ability to enjoy the upsides as well as protecting them on the downsides. I do not see a downside to imposing a percentage. But you still have to calculate the price on a quarterly basis, but you'd have to do that to know if you're in the $400 tranche or $600 tranche in their proposal. So there's no additional work that comes from doing a percentage, in my opinion. It's the same work for Standard Lithium and the same level of transparency for the royalty owners under each scenario. What I provided here is a sensitivity table that shows what those outcomes are at each percentage. If you impose the 2.5% royalty, a 5% royalty, a 7.5% royalty, a 10% royalty, 12.5% royalty, a 1/6, and obviously a 1/5% royalty. This is for everyone's benefit. It is so that everyone can make the best decision based on what the impact is. At a 12.5% royalty, the post-tax NPV at the 8% discount rate that using their modeling at the $30,000 base case would be a $433 million NPV and a 21% post-tax IRR. It would result in a significantly greater average royalty per ton for the royalty owner. In their proposal at $30,000, it would be $400. At 12.5%, it would be $3,750 per ton. Now, I can understand an argument that, you know, maybe 12.5% isn't exactly right. There, maybe 10%, maybe 16%. There, all of those things are obviously possible. I'm just trying to provide the best information to the committee or to you guys to make that decision. I did provide a second table that does the exact same thing, but assumes a $35,000 price. The purpose of this is just to show you how sensitive these outcomes are to the lithium prices. At a $35,000 price, you can see the NPV grows enormously and the returns grow quite a bit as well. At $35,000 per ton, the 537 million at their royalty proposal grows to 710 million. That is an enormous growth. It just shows you how sensitive to price this project is. At this price, average price, the 12.5% royalty would result in a $590 million NPV and a 25% rate of return. It would also result in a $4,375 royalty. That shows you the growth from 30,000 to 35,000, shows you the growth that they both share in. They get a huge upside and the royalty owners get a big upside. I've also been asked to do one other scenario in which we took a price that grew linearly from $30,000 to $70,000 over the 20 years, just as a demonstrative, just to demonstrate how much of an upside windfall there is for everybody if those prices do go up to that level. At that level, the NPVs start getting over $1 billion at their royalty proposals and even up to a 5% royalty. The rates of return are well over 25% at virtually any royalty level. There's a significant amount of upside. The comparison of the royalty versus their proposal at these higher prices really demonstrates the gap that would exist between their proposal and our proposal, and how much more the royalty owners would enjoy as a result without making the project uneconomic.
Thanks, Eric. So then one last data point that you found relevant was the integration statute. Can you just mention that briefly and how that fits with what your recommendation is?
Sure. So I also looked at the statutes on integration, or how I think of it, force pooling, but in Arkansas it's called integration. When there's an equitable share of brine in the integration, that statute established a minimum royalty of 12.5%. To me, that is a more meaningful comparator than the comparators offered by Standard Lithium at this point. So ultimately, it's our conclusion that the recommended royalty rate be 12.5%. Obviously, I was here for the testimony that they believe that would make the project not viable. Based on their own economics, their own pro forma analysis, it does seem that there must be more to it. I do not understand how they can say the project's not viable at 12.5% royalty based on their own internal economics. It's ultimately a fair and equitable sharing of the economic benefits of the plant. In my opinion, it doesn't overburden the applicants, and it's, as we just saw, it's consistent with the pre-existing Arkansas statute on integrated royalty.
With that, I'll pass the witness.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. Commissioners, is this the opportune time to stop the proceeding and break for lunch? Everybody is nodding in attention. How much time does the commission want to take for lunch? An hour. It is. Okay, sure thing. So I'm looking at the clock here. I guess that would be about 1:30. All right. We are off the record. We'll be back on at 1:30. Mr. Honey, you can start your examination at that point, and then we're done with this witness. We'll get to public comment. We're off the record.
All right. Everybody go to the stairs.
Recording stopped.